The year is 1994. Distinctive Software, a studio from my hometown best known for their production of Test Drive, was acquired by the newly reshuffled giant Electronic Arts with one simple goal: to take their plentiful experience in the realm of developing exotic racing games and create the most impressive racing game the world had yet to see. It would involve the expertise of revered automotive magazine Road and Track to match vehicle behavior and imitate vehicle sounds all the way down to individual gear levers. The game would be a technical showcase of what the realm of video games could do for the automobile. It may have been limited to a comparatively barren 8 cars and 3 point-to-point tracks, but the technological advancements that Need for Speed would bring forwards were second to no other. The final product was a knockout success, originally only developed for the scarcely popular 3DO, but in time due to fierce demand gaining ports to the PlayStation, Sega Saturn, and Microsoft computers. It was clear that Electronic Arts' acquisition had paid off, with Distinctive Software rebranded to EA Canada, and a pipeline of Need for Speed games which would evolve around the concept that the original 1994 release had showcased. Need for Speed was EA's golden child. Release after release, critical acclaim would grow higher and higher, and the progress made up to Porsche Unleashed in 2000 was staggering. 2001. The PlayStation 2 had taken the gaming world by storm, and in the sidelines, many publishers, including EA, looked towards how to get the most out of not only far more computing power, but a vastly larger group of customers looking for standout games. They didn't just have new hardware to work with. As to contract and test the waters on future developers, EA had signed fellow Vancouver studio Black Box to develop Hot Pursuit 2 for the PlayStation 2. Hot Pursuit 2 was phenomenal, a cataclysmic step forwards in just what a racing game could be in comparison to its 5th generation counterparts, and critically, numerical backing to Black Box's show-stopping first entry. So then, with an eager and passionate young studio behind the wheel of the most prominent racing game series for racing exotic cars in lavish environments, and a guaranteed moneymaker in tune, what would this collaboration entail? Need for Speed Underground would be revealed in April of 2003. Shocking, yet taking the world by storm. Over 20 years later, the legacy in which these games had left behind still remains. But today the question is then raised: why? And today, as we undergo an in-depth retrospective on the series that changed Need for Speed forever, this is Underground. In order to understand the depth of why Underground was such a culture shock, we have to take a look at what the game represented in its time. Over in Japan, plenty of racing games took narrative around that of Japanese sports cars and the tuning scene which exploded throughout 1990s Japan. In the West, these concepts didn't catch on all that well in the realm of video games until far later. The nucleus of what Western racing games media was all about encircled supercars and the exotic lifestyle. Of course, just to clarify, I'm referring to the vast majority of mainstream racing games, the kind that you'd see all over game stores at the time. It wasn't until the outrageous popularity of a small indie series whose title sounds similar to Gassed and Dubious that the media machine started firing on all cylinders. Need for Speed has always originated from exacting popular concepts to a degree that has never been seen before. It's never really been the first to supercars or any one of its styles, but instead focuses on executing that very trend to the finest degree in its genre. Right out of the gate, after Hot Pursuit 2, the desire to innovate and move on from the tried and true methodology of games past was a bold and risky decision. Underground would drop every past pretense of what Need for Speed was, all in favor of a trend that we didn't know would actually be successful. This was a different era. Games didn't take as long to develop, and therefore, risks like this were more commonplace. Now, of course, they would have to outweigh the cost of a potential sales disaster if this new identity didn't work, but there would always be next year's game if it did. Never, ever have we seen a racing series switch up its identity so far as Need for Speed did with Underground. A Supra used to be the laughingstock of the earliest games car list, and now here we are with that exact same vehicle as the highest aspiration you could have to work towards. The vibrant, exotic locations and fantasy-like stages all gone in favor of an exclusively dark, twilight setting all set throughout a single city. Police, which the anthology had become a poster child for, completely abandoned, which to this day is a choice that I've never truly agreed agreed with, but there were legitimate legal reasons behind this. Honda, in particular, was already notorious for the EK generation Civic used in the real world as cheap fun for illegal street racing, and the connotations of that same vehicle used in a street racing video game with police chases were less than favorable. So therefore, this was not feasible for Underground, and compromises had to be made to build up the game's car roster. To dissect just how both of the Underground games changed the future of this series, I want to go piece by piece, starting with that first game, and traveling all the way to the end of Underground 2. Underground 1 is a game that I grew up with. The original Hot Pursuit may have been my introduction to the franchise as a whole, but I've always had a soft spot for Underground. Before revisiting the game for this video, it had been nearly 15 years since I last played this game, with many fond memories still ingrained within me, but with a modern-day adult mindset, I found Underground 1 to be far more divisive, yet also uniquely more charming than I remembered. And without a doubt, where I found this to be the most apparent is through its mix-up in campaign. Before we get into that, however, I want to help you mix up your game library. We've partnered with Instant Gaming to help you get more games for less money. How does this work, you may ask? Well, Instant Gaming allows you a huge selection of popular releases on PC, Xbox, PlayStation, and Nintendo Switch, of which you can purchase for a heavily discounted price straight from authorized resellers. Not only can you pick up plenty of racing games for a great price, including some delisted ones not available elsewhere, but you can even pre-order games such as the upcoming Test Drive Solar Crown for a healthy discount. All that you have to do is scan the QR code on screen or use my link in the description down below to take you to their website, and to a giveaway which we're hosting that'll have winners every single month. I've picked up games from Instant Gaming before and can easily vouch for their quality service, but if that isn't enough, just peep the Trustpilot rating. Over 700,000 reviews says a lot. Thank you so much to Instant Gaming for continuing to sponsor the channel, and it's time to get back to the video. There's a brutally important piece of context that I find very important when we look back at Underground's career. The games which preceded it were very strictly gameplay focused. There were no real characters or narratives at all, simply a bunch of menus leading you to complete a career of events. Functionally, with Hot Pursuit 2, this format had easily reached its peak, at what I would say was a real impasse where it would be near impossible to improve upon this without adding in some form of a story to drape upon its gameplay skeleton. Underground was the first Need for Speed game to even have a story, and boy is it ever dated. The usage of pre-rendered CG cutscenes throughout this era of video games was exceedingly common, but for racing games, this was uncharted territory. These are incredibly complex, expensive, and data heavy, so when the choice was made for Underground's story to be presented through this fashion, there had to be limitations. In the final cut, Underground had less than 5 minutes of CG movies in total, so you really aren't going to be seeing much of them. This scarcity though certainly makes them memorable, well, as long as you can visually pick up on them through the blurry encoding format that they used. Due to the scarcity of these cinematics, the structure and plot of Underground's story couldn't be all that complex, but it's about enough to give you at least some sort of a world to wrap yourself in. Yourself, the player, start off by daydreaming and awaken to your guide through Olympic City and its racing scene, Samantha. Your goal is very simple. Take down the street racers of the city on your path to dethroning the infamous Eddie and his skyline to crown yourself the king of Olympic City. You'll have minor pauses along the way, such as Samantha getting her car stolen away, or guys like TJ who can hook you up with special parts in exchange for winning a few special events. But it's very linear and straightforward. That linearity is something that really surprised me on my second visit to Underground, as if I had to name one thing that really stuck out to me as Underground's largest downfall, is its career structure. Underground's career gameplay is at its core one of the most bare bones and rudimentary approaches to a career the series had seen up to this point. You have a hugely overinflated 111 races to complete, which at first sounds cool as that is a lot of game on offer. But of those 111 races, the variety in gameplay is near non-existent. And once you get up to about the halfway point, an immense fatigue kicks in. This to me is Underground's largest flaw. It simply overstays its welcome to the point of making you lose love for what are some truly, really damn fun events. You have 5 main event styles: race, time trial, drift, drag, and knockout. Race is what you would expect from Need for Speed prior. You'll be dropped into a preset route in Olympic City, think the Hot Pursuit 10 but in a dense city, which you'll fight against 3 other street racers for the win. These are the main meat of what you'll be doing. And for the most part, I truly do enjoy them. As Olympic City isn't an interconnected open world, at least to the player, the tracks that can be orchestrated are so much damn fun to be racing on. You'll go through sewers, bustling metropolitan grids, flowing beautiful highways, jump across drawbridges and through laundry-laden back alleys. The track design is plenty fun until you reach that halfway point once again and, well, you've seen it all a million times. Shortcuts appear in full force, some of them being especially daring or risky, encouraging you to learn some game sense in order to calculate how to strategically use them, which I enjoyed a lot. But this certainly isn't a perfect mode. While I love a little risk in my games, how traffic is implemented in Underground defeats the purpose of fun risk. You can occasionally get hit by a traffic car, which is well and truly unavoidable in some cases, completely defunking your entire race, forcing a restart. Risk is only fun when it's dependent on skill. When you can just lose because of an unlucky car spawn, that's just poor design. Worse so is because the race routes here aren't locked off. If a traffic car pushes you between a side street that you shouldn't be racing on, your chances of winning are irrevocable. Granted, situations like this are few and far between, but not uncommon enough as to where I can't just gloss over it. Just like I will with time trials and lap knockout, because they function the same as pretty much every other in history. They're very fun modes, but again, they inherit all of the standard race types pros, and also those same cons which I just went over. Where things get funky is with drift and drag. This was the first time that these styles were implemented into a Need for Speed game, becoming absolute series staples ever since. What's different about drift events in Underground all the way up to Carbon is that they have a dramatically altered version of the game's physics model just for these events. It allows the rear wheels a highly exaggerated slip angle, as if you put those McDonald's trays underneath. Now of course done not to soft lock you out of completing them, they had to make this so even front wheel drive cars can perform near on just as well as rear wheel drive vehicles. But it's always been a bit cursed. Drift events also are, as in literally every single Need for Speed review that I've mentioned, just too damn easy. You can blindfold yourself and still manage to be 100,000 points ahead of your opposition by the time your final lap is over. Thank God you can choose your difficulty for each individual event then, huh? Drag is the last bad boy to cover here, and it's always been something that I've had serious tough love with. The sense of speed and risk factor in these is second to no other, and you rarely get racing games with both drag, drift, and normal races all in one. The ability to jump over trains, which could ordinarily hit you if you missed a ramp, and dodge containers on your way to the finish line is plenty of fun, but drag is by far the single jankiest event style in the entire game. The controls are odd. Need for Speed games of this vintage locked away full player control in favor of tapping the analog stick in either direction to automatically switch lanes. This wouldn't be an issue if it didn't have the most absurd input delay you could ever imagine. And with a mode that requires you to dodge traffic cars, closed lanes, and whole trains which will knock you into next Thursday, that simply doesn't work. Flawed then are the events in Underground, but as much as I critique this game, I find just as many reasons to have a great time. What emblematizes this perfectly is how Underground 1's career progression is carried out. Underground is extremely unique in how it handles vehicles and car progression. You'll start off in a total base model Civic or Dodge Neon, and then climb your way up extremely slowly to the highest tier of cars in the game, which would be an RX-7, Supra, Skyline, all that jazz. It's very unique, as you don't feel a very typical sense of accomplishment as you progress up these tiers of vehicles. Speed is earned incrementally, and because of that, speed is due to the upgrades themselves rather than the car. Buying new cars doesn't have much gratification to it, though I will say, one of my favorite parts about how Underground handles its car progression system is the trade-in feature. At any point, you can trade in your current car and replace it with another one from the dealership, which then takes on every upgrade and visual customization bit that you've had on your existing ride. I personally love to switch up the cars that I use in racing games quite often, so this was truly a godsend, and it encourages you to try out as much of the very limited car list as possible. What's very unique though about this approach to progression, and having upgrades scale all the way up to the highest echelon of vehicles, is that you can very easily use one single car throughout the entire game if you wanted, or build up one of the starter cars right at the end when you have everything unlocked to blow the doors off of Supras and Skylines. This ability to choose your own style of gameplay and tailor the cars that you use throughout your career to so many different styles is utterly amazing. Vehicle progression though isn't the only way that the element of progress stuck with me on my Underground revisit. Once you get to the latter 20 to 30% of the career, the difficulty ramps up. dramatically. Now, difficulty scaling with the player is something that I highly encourage. You're of course going to improve in both your understanding of the game's physics, shortcuts, and how to be faster in your runtime. So the AI of course should mirror this, except in Underground, they don't mirror your driving progression. They just get God mode. The physics model for the AI completely changes in the later game, allowing for them to pull off moves physically impossible for yourself to recreate. And what makes this worse is it doesn't feel natural in the slightest. You'll be cruising along to an easy breezy first place run after a near 10-minute long race, and in those final crucial corners you can spot the AI driving at the speed of light itself, blasting past you at nearly double your corner speed simply because that's what they're programmed to do if behind the player for long enough. Challenge is fun in racing games, but challenge is only fun to myself when it's down to my own skill. When challenge is down to how I can cheese the AI with artificially boosted competence to the point of comedy, it simply isn't enjoyable. So then, the campaign in Underground is certainly bold, and I very much love it for that. Despite its many flaws, it undeniably still is a brilliant time, even if I do believe that it should be around 30% shorter to help ease the repetitive nature that it wears strongly. But you see, the campaign, while a big mix-up in comparison to Need for Speed's past, what we all remember Underground for is how it changed this series' approach to car culture. The late 1990s and early 2000s were the golden ages of tuner import culture. Much of this culture did originate from Japan, but when the popularity of Japanese imports landed on the US domestic market, it was like an explosion. All throughout pop culture, the streets of cities and small-town America were full of the cheap, efficient-to-run, and easy-to-modify Japanese cars, which were heavily niche in the country's past. The monumental shift in magazines, movies, TV, the tuner scene caught the attention of North America harder than any trends that have come since. EA Black Box weren't deaf to this, and of course, while a tremendous risk to completely ditch what the series was beforehand, there would no matter what be a guaranteed massive group of people who would flock to this cash-in on recent culture. Their mission then became, how do we completely revamp this speed engine and drop every one of the series' existing vehicles to complement this new restructuring, and on top of that, impress the millions of Need for Speed fans. Before anything, this entirely new car list had to fit this game's theme like they were destined for each other. Not many big-budget racing games, especially in the arcade racing niche, decided to have a larger fleet of, quote, normal cars. Civics, Sentras, Golf GTIs, base model WRXs, not even the STI. Black Box clearly understood that in order to complement the tuner scene, you had to use the exact same cars that they were, and so they did. My only real criticism, apart from the very limited selection of cars, is that there are zero European vehicles at all, and what American cars do appear are strictly that of the affordable performance variety. I do see why this choice was made, but considering this was far expanded in the sequel, it seems more like a design limitation than anything else. This wasn't our ordinary hot pursuit or high stakes though, and the possibilities of what you can do to these cars had to be revolutionary. While in its predecessors, visual customization was sparse, the odd paint color choice, and that's about it as far as things went. Nah. Underground was for the tuners, so you had to be able to make your car stylish. Underground's customizability surprisingly holds up relatively well even to this day. The plethora of bumpers, skirts, wheels, and wings were only just the surface of Underground's personalized approach. You could toss on neon underglow, swap headlights and taillights, change exhaust tips, paint your engine's accents and brake calipers, and to drape atop of all of this, one of the most versatile vinyl and decal editors of its time period. This customizability wasn't limited just to visuals, but under the hood as well. You want to put a giant turbo on an EK Civic and turn it into a drag machine? Go on ahead. From engine to nitrous, suspension, brake upgrades, which, by the way, actually affect the appearance of your physical rotors and calipers. And as I mentioned earlier, you have so much freedom in which cars you want to build for any point in your career, providing you have it unlocked. Have enough of both customization styles and you'll earn your right a seat on multiple magazine covers throughout your career. A pretty damn fun way to build a connection to a specific build or car, something that this game does better than many others, even in the modern day. So the cars fit Underground's theming like a tailored glove, and the modifications you can perform have impressed even through the test of time. But this is a 20-year-old game now, so how do they play? In short, absolutely wonderful. Underground's physics never needed to change all that much from Hot Pursuit 2 beforehand. Granted, the change in environments would require some tweaking and polish to make it feel natural, and that they do. There's a beautiful sense of ease and cars that feel fleet of foot. I've grown accustomed to Need for Speed games having obnoxious input delay, but when you go back to this era of more simplistic arcade physics which were tailored exclusively to accentuate the thrill of high-speed driving, rather than simulating a more realistic model, this input delay is non-existent. Vehicles are so responsive, but they don't feel exactly the same as each other either. The differences between all three drivetrain layouts is clear-cut, with the distinct push and pull of front or rear-wheel drive focused powertrains. Weight, while never including any heavy hitters in the kart list, is enough to feel the difference between a nimble Integra Type R and a Supra which is over 1,000 pounds heavier. All of these elements were included to not make Underground feel too simplistic. What it is, though, is a more fun and light-hearted take on typical driving characteristics, and that's an approach that I feel matches the rest of this game to a T. The last realm of Underground's approach to vehicles that needs just as large of a spotlight is a tremendous step up in audio production. The lead audio chief Charles Deenan had an interview with IGN back when the game was first releasing, divulging many of the tricks and tribulations that the team went through in the development process. I'll leave a link to the full interview in the description, but I do want to point out the most standout lines. Going from PlayStation 1 to the vastly more powerful PlayStation 2 allowed developers to ditch the old chip-generated sounds in favor of handcrafted audio, as the technology finally had the memory for large format audio files. This meant that dyno runs were used to capture the essence of each one of Underground's cars, a seemingly outrageous task but made possible due to the limited car list size and EA's monetary backing. The Skyline in particular was notorious to record due to the turbocharger's induction noise, causing for far more of an airy tone than they wanted to show off in-game. Of course, raw dyno footage wasn't going to cut it, so they were edited and spruced up to give a very punchy yet broad spectrum of engine sounds in which to bless the ears of the player. I honestly still believe that some of the sounds hold up very well today. The formatting itself clearly is less polished than what we've come to expect with modern technology, but the raw sounds themselves, they really get the blood pumping. Audio is great and all, in terms of your vehicle sounds, but what helped carry Underground 1 to its iconographic status, and arguably helped reinforce its tone and atmosphere better than anything else, is its soundtrack. The late 90s and early 2000s were simply iconic for the countless bangers that dropped constantly, and Underground handpicked some of the best. While primarily spotlighting the best of hip-hop and electronic music, you'd be hard-pressed to find at least 10 songs in this soundtrack that you wouldn't blast at 110% volume speeding down Olympic City. Of course, I can't go very in-depth due to the copyright of the licensed music, and truthfully, even if I could, I'm no music aficionado. I just know a good soundtrack when I hear it. And Underground isn't far off from being one of the single greatest racing game soundtracks of all time. Now, to throw some more important context on Underground's name, it would be a crucial mistake not to mention just how much this one game influenced not just Need for Speed's entire future, but the arcade racer. Underground was, of course, a knockout commercial success, and years after its launch, countless games took inspiration to capitalize on this new genre norm. Most prominently in my mind are Juiced 1 and 2. Nothing, though, comes close to how this game changed the future and expectations of what Need for Speed would come to be even in the modern day. You see, Underground was so big for this series that there are plenty of people I know who are fully convinced that these games serve as the, quote, true beginning of this franchise. Now, this is not a take that I side with, but on some levels I do see where the argument comes from. Just looking at the next releases, Underground 2, Most Wanted, Carbon. None of these games would have existed without the initial step that Underground 1 took. The huge discrepancy in popularity of the first 5 entries in comparison to the Underground to Carbon era is staggering, so I can't fully fault that mindset even though it is a very one-sided view of the series. This same view in turn has led to a hell of a paradox. Underground sparked an era of Need for Speeds so good, I'd argue the series has virtually zero chance of reaching the same glory ever again. This era was lightning in a bottle, a perfect moment in time that cannot be replicated in the modern day. This is why I've been one of the larger critics of the Ghost era of Need for Speed games, because while they do absolutely have their own merits, it was clear that this was a last-ditch effort of attempting to recreate the same success and style of a lot of the Black Box era games through a modern lens. Underground only succeeded because of risks. Risks that had to be made to surprise everyone. With a game that no one could say that they've played anything like before. I love Need for Speed, but I hate seeing the series live in the shadow of its own former glory out of fear of risk, even though that same risk is what led it to become one of the most famous racing titles in history. Need for Speed Underground, especially in 2024, is not by any means a perfect game. It's flawed, far more strongly than I remembered, but to the same level, carries such a heavy persona and energy that cannot ever be replicated. Its style, music, of the era theming hold up brilliantly. It's aged, yes, no question, but it hasn't aged poorly. Underground will and always will be the quintessential 2000s tuner time capsule, and that alone is enough for me to still hold a strong sense of adoration for it.